Hello, fellow fight fans, and welcome to the Untitled Fightcast number 014. And we have some news this week to talk about. Following up on Jon Jones, Anthony Smith defending his home, and some actually good news for once regarding UFC 249. So wrap up, lock in, and let's get it started. Alright, now I don't want to spend too long on this because I want to get to the good news that we actually have this week, but let's start with the shit show that continues to be Jon Jones. More body cam footage came out of the Jon Jones incident, this time from the first officer on the scene. This is the same officer, I believe, that pulled Jon over for drag racing, as he referred to the officer by his first name, Jason. Swiftly moving through the highlights, Jon had said he was treating the homeless like human beings in the previous body cam footage, and he did later on in this body cam footage because they put it side by side with the previous footage that we had. And when Jon said he was treating the homeless like human beings, apparently what he actually meant was giving them red Solo cups full of alcohol. I mean, look at this.
Is he giving them alcohol in a Solo cup?
I think he did.
Oh my gosh.
Hey,
Trying to treat them like human beings. Yeah, that's what he said.
And I'm sorry for the audio listeners, but Jon literally had an entire sleeve of red Solo cups. If you're gonna drink by yourself in your car, you're most likely gonna either just drink straight out the bottle or maybe just have one cup with you. Why the fuck did he bring an entire sleeve of Solo cups? Was he actually planning on finding homeless people and giving them alcohol? Is just the strangest thing. And not only was he drinking and driving, but he was also apparently smoking weed.
He's got marijuana residue. He's got green leaves all over his sweater and his sweats, and he's got a bud of marijuana on the console.
Not that weed is a big deal by itself, but when you're driving and you smoke on top of drinking, that's no good. And no, we do not endorse smoking and driving here on the Untitled Fightcast. It's no good. After all this was over and they had Jon at the station, Jon was for some reason all happy and shit.
You're like, this doesn't feel right. You're like, this is my job. I could feel the hesitation. You're like, like maybe.
I understand, Mr. Jones.
I'm sorry.
I wanted to not see you again, too.
I'm sorry.
I mean, I was stunned. It came off as so cocky, as if he somehow, some way, knew that he was going to get out of this, and evidently, he just got a slap on the wrist after all was said and done. But the officer in question, who has given us this new body cam footage, spoke with Jon about the thing that I personally thought was the most important thing that everyone in the MMA media was seemingly glossing over, and that's the shooting of the gun, just apparently into the air, assumably.
So, we heard a gunshot. That's why we were down there. Okay? We came over to your car. You were the only one there. Two homeless guys right next to your vehicle. I don't know if they were homeless. They appeared to be possibly homeless. They were standing next to your car. We contacted you. I don't know if you remember. I introduced myself to you. I immediately asked you about the gunshot. You said you didn't know. After we got you out of the car, after the investigation took place, you were placed under arrest. After that happened, we had to tow the vehicle. We couldn't leave it there unattended and on the road like that. An inventory was done of the vehicle. A handgun was located under the driver's seat. There was also a spent casing right outside your driver's side door. Do you want to tell me what happened with the gunshot? No? Even if you shot it straight up in the air, man, that is very dangerous. You don't know where it's coming down, regardless of what caliber it is. It's a good way to get somebody hurt.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Just asked. I had to ask.
And by the by, let's quickly cut back to the officer finding the gun in Jon's car.
Let me look under the seat real quick. I'm going to get in there. What's what, Debbie?
That lid?
Oh, there it is.
What is it?
Handgun.
You know the casing's in it.
Jeez.
For our audio listeners, it was in fact just under the front seat, just chilling. And the officer talks about how shooting the gun in the air is still hella dangerous, and the evidence they found that suggests Jon was in fact the one that was responsible for the shot that the officers were initially responding to.
So me and Debbie were in the parking lot, and we heard a gunshot. So we come flying out of the parking lot. He's the only one sitting here. His car's running.
And after all the evidence that he goes over, Jon is just silent, as he probably should be, because
You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law.
But here's the number one evidence that Jon did indeed fire the gun. When the officer came up to his car in the very beginning of this video and asked him if he had heard the gunshot, Jon literally says, well, I'll just let you listen to the clip first.
Hey, Jason.
Hello, sir. Officer Brown, Albuquerque Police. Did you just hear a gunshot?
I did it.
I've gone over this clip about 10 times now, trying to figure out if I misheard what I heard. But it's very clear. Jon very explicitly says, I did it, instead of I did, as in responding to the officer asking him if he heard the gunshot. This is called a Freudian slip. When you say something that is on your mind by accident, when you mean to say something else, and that's probably because he was both scared and drunk. Let's listen to it again.
Did you just hear a gunshot?
I did it. I did it.
The officer asks him if he heard the shot, and Jon wants to say, I did, as in I did hear the shot. And I'm very confident about this because when Jon says it again, that's what he says. He says, I did. And that's after the officer explicitly asks him a second time if he heard the gunshot. I think the officer didn't even realize that Jon accidentally confessed to shooting the gun. He asks if he heard it, and he literally says, I did it. So congrats to Jon for being lucid enough drunk to realize he just fucked up really hard, and he really got away with that one. Not to mention the fact that this charge actually got dropped. The charge of negligent use of a firearm, and might I just say, fuck that judge. I genuinely don't think that this is the judge that we talked about in the last video, the judge that said, if I see you in here again, it's going to be bad for you. I'm not sure about this. This is simply speculation because I can't imagine that the judge that had said that before would have let Jon get away with this, put him on house arrest when we're in the middle of a quarantine anyhow, and drop the charge of discharging a firearm within city limits. It's so disgusting. It pisses me off so much. But let's just get on to the next bit of news. Just after 4 a.m. on Sunday, April 5th, Anthony Smith got woken up by his wife telling him that there was a man in their home. The man was yelling at the top of his lungs with so much anger, in fact, that he would run out of breath and then continue to scream. And by the way, I'm not going to go over this in too much detail because Ariel Helwani actually had an amazing interview with Smith himself, and it's much better than any recap I could give y'all here. But with that being said, I'm going to go over the bullet points. After Smith hesitated for just a moment as he prepared himself to possibly give his life to protect his family, his wife, his mother-in-law, and his 3 daughters, the aptly nicknamed Anthony Lionheart Smith rushed the home invader and fought him tooth and nail, taking him to the ground and beating him up with punches, elbows, knees. But no matter how many of these that Smith threw, the guy just would not stop fighting. And these are things that we'd have even put out UFC fighters, things that have put out other UFC fighters in Smith's career. Whether it was from drugs, mental illness, or a bit of both, the home invader was there in the fight to stay until the cops would eventually show up. During the fight, Smith was even asking him, through yelling, a few different questions, all of which the invader responded to with lies. Smith asked the man if he was alone when the invader responded that he was not, and even called out for a man named Luke, which actually ended up being the invader's own name. Again, whether this guy was on drugs or had a mental illness, it's not clear if maybe he actually thought he was with someone that he wasn't himself. Smith then asked him if he had any weapons, and the invader said yes, even though that also wasn't true. And mind you, he's yelling and asking these questions as he's beating the crap out of this guy. His mother-in-law eventually brought him a knife from the kitchen, which he held to the man for a short period of time, but then put the knife down somewhere because it was hard to control the man with only one hand. So he wanted to have two hands to more adeptly hold him down. And at a certain time, he actually even got his wife to hold the man's legs out because when someone curls up into a ball, as stated by Anthony Smith, it's harder to control someone. And he actually told the man to not kick his wife. And the man very calmly, like he calmed down and then said, okay, and then didn't try to do anything with his legs. He didn't try to kick his wife. He didn't try to pull his legs away. He simply continued to fight Anthony Smith with the top half of his body. So again, either this dude was on some crazy drugs, mentally ill, maybe possibly both. And when the cops finally got there, that's when Smith actually got angry because before this, he was simply in attack mode and not necessarily angry in the moment. The cops had to remove Smith from the room, understandably, of course, but as he walked out of the room past the home invader, the man in question then calmly said,
I'll never forget this. They have to walk me by him to get me into another room because I'm freaking out. And he looked up at me with the saddest look on his face. And he's cut all over the place. He's bleeding. His face is swollen, covered in blood. And like so calmly, he looked up at me and said, hey man, I'm sorry. I was like, what in the world? That's it? That's all you have to say? Like, hey man, I'm sorry.
I mean, again, just a weird human being at this point. All of this is after the invader had apparently broken into multiple cars on the street and even into someone else's home where he had been ran out of simply by getting yelled at before trying to break back into the home through the front door. Perhaps he thought it was an entirely different home, and why he didn't attack the guy that yelled at him also can't even be answered. As for the home invader's motives, we don't know that either because after breaking in all those cars, he didn't steal a single thing. And when I say broke into the cars and the houses, he apparently didn't break any windows, he didn't bust down any doors, he didn't pick any locks. People in this community, because apparently it's a very nice community, simply just leave their cars unlocked and leave their doors unlocked from time to time. Anthony Smith himself saying that this is not uncommon. But when you live in a nice neighborhood, it's not about people in your neighborhood doing things. Evidently, it's about bad people coming from outside the community and doing bad things once they're there. This is unfortunately a hard way for Smith and his family and the rest of his community to learn that you have to lock up your shit. I mean, this blew my mind when he said that people just leave their shit open from time to time. You just don't do that. You don't just leave your shit unlocked. This is what happens. Anthony Smith even himself said that it's his fault that the garage door was not just unlocked but left wide open. He said that on the video camera footage they watched afterwards, the invader almost walked past his home, stopped, looked over, and saw that the garage door was just wide open. So obviously, this drugged out or mentally ill guy was like, well, fuck, they're just inviting me in. And Smith was saying that when he found out there was a man in his home that he didn't know how long he had been there. Thankfully, the guy literally just started yelling basically as soon as he had gotten to the home. And again, he didn't steal anything. He didn't try to break anything. So there's no obvious motive. Thankfully, everyone was okay, especially when he got into someone else's home. He didn't hurt those people because obviously, they're not trained fighters. And thankfully, when he did eventually get into a second home, it was the home of a trained fighter. And Smith was even saying that he actually felt a little bit inadequate afterwards, that he threw everything he could at this guy and he just couldn't put him away. And this is a guy that fights at 205 pounds. That's after cutting weight. And he said that this guy couldn't have been more than 170 pounds. But that's what mental illness, adrenaline, and possibly drugs will do to someone. He said when the fight was over, the guy's face was cut up. It was bruised and swollen. He looked like hell, but he just couldn't put put this guy away. Couldn't knock him out. Couldn't submit him. And by submit, I mean like choke the guy out. Obviously, he's not going to put an arm bar on the guy and try to tap him out. That's crazy. Maybe you could break a guy's arm like that, but in a life or death situation, who knows how effective that is. But also, Anthony Smith said that he usually sleeps with a gun by his bed or like under his pillow, and this was one of the very few times that he didn't. He said this is probably the first time he's done this in about 6 months, that he has a bag that he carries with him that has the gun in it when he goes out and about for self-defense. And this particular time, he just didn't take it out of the bag. And this is why discipline is important in life, but discipline and consistency with things like locking your doors, having a weapon by your bed. When it comes to the safety of yourself and your loved ones, you can't be lax about these things even once. Smith saying himself that they had gotten too comfortable, that they even had a new security system that they just don't use. And so he said things are going to change around the house. They're going to make sure the doors are locked, the alarm system's on, all these things when they go to bed. But it's just a shame that they had to learn the hard way, because the hard way could have been even a lot harder. God forbid something worse had happened. Meanwhile, just because Smith couldn't put this deranged lunatic away, Jon Jones, after everything he's been through very recently, had the fucking audacity to tweet out, "No way, dude, would have left my house walking." Like, Jon fucking Jones, shut the fuck up. You're an actual piece of shit. Anthony Smith is a hero. Meanwhile, you're out here endangering people's lives by driving drunk and shooting guns into the air. I mean, Smith said it himself, it's easy to think you're a badass especially when you're a fighter for a living, but when you wake up in the middle of the night and there is a stranger in your home, you just kind of shit your pants a little bit. And again, then he took that second to shit his pants, and then he went and did what he did. But it's so easy to talk the talk. Jon can say whatever he wants until someone actually breaks into his home, and then he himself shits his pants. Jon just finds every way to be an actual piece of shit, and I'm at the point where I actually fucking hate this dude. And obviously, I'm here trying to be a reporter with this podcast, but I will never not be authentic. I will never censor the way that I speak. Not just with cursing, but the way that I feel about things. And Jon Jones is such a piece of fucking shit. So with all of that craziness out of the way, let's get to the actual good news for the week. Despite what I said last week, stating that I believe Tony should not fight if he's not going to fight Khabib, because if he loses a fight that's not against Khabib, then he's going to lose his chance at a title shot. Well, Tony is now scheduled to fight Justin Gaethje on April 18th for the interim title belt, which, if Tony wins, will be the second time he's won the interim belt. And mind you, he never actually even lost a fight since the first time he won it. He just got stripped of the belt for seemingly no reason, but that's a whole nother story. Along with that, the co-main event between Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas is also still going on, which I am super excited for, since Rose is in fact my second favorite fighter, only next to Israel Adesanya, who is in fact my spirit animal. Another fighter I very much enjoy, Greg Hardy, will be fighting against an undefeated fighter in Jorgen De Castro. Francis Ngannou versus Arsenio Rosenstrike was supposed to happen on March 28th, but will now be the featured prelim of this card, which I actually, by the way, think is crazy. This was going to headline its own fight night. This should absolutely be on the main card. But that being said, this might be the most stacked card we've actually seen in a long time. If the UFC is going to start the next chapter of this year, this is the way to do it. And yes, you heard me right. This is the start of a new chapter, because the venue that Dana is putting on the fight card has been booked for the next 2 months. And Dana plans to start holding events weekly as the UFC did before. However, those cards are not yet figured out. This US location that Dana has alluded to, Dana also hasn't actually officially announced what or where this venue is, stating that he doesn't want the venue to start getting hate mail on, email, social media, even maybe physical mail from angry fans and media members, which I totally get. But along with this U.S. location, Dana White also said that he has acquired a private fucking island so that his international fighters can fight there as well to keep the fight train rolling. Look, I'm still not sure if I agree with putting on events during this global pandemic, but I have to say, so many props to not only Dana, but to everyone in the UFC that has somehow, some way, figured out not only how to get April 18th to still be a thing, but to secure 2 venues, including a private fucking island to start this train rolling again. And look, so long as we don't hear any news of one of the fighters or staff members catching COVID-19, then to be honest, I don't think there's really anything we can say about it. Now, if someone does catch it, then there's going to be a big and sad "I told you so" from a lot of the people in the community media, but fingers crossed that we don't have to end up doing that, because some people like to be petty and like to be able to say "I told you so," but if it has to come at the expense of someone's health or possibly life, it's just not worth it, and I really hope that doesn't become a part of the story moving forward. Dana said that they've cut down the staff to the smallest number of people possible, and that of course it's going to be harder to run the event like that, but that they're taking all the proper precautions to keep everyone safe. You know, these fighters want to fight, they need to fight to get paid, and so I get it. And hey, between now and April 18th, who the hell knows? Everything could fly right out the goddamn window and we could be back to square one. But hopefully that won't be the news that I'm bringing to you next week. So what a crazy, crazy week in MMA. Just like last week, I really didn't think there would be much to talk about. That or it would be bad news. And to be fair, 2 of the 3 things we technically talked about were outside of the sport and not exactly good things. But the world of MMA, in one way or another, continues to deliver. And in some ways, I guess that's better than nothing. But thank you for all of the support. It truly means the world to me. This has been Zephyr of the Untitled Fightcast, and I'll talk to y'all in next week's episode.